internet people. Today I'm going to be talking Vietnam in film, more specifically films involving the Vietnam War. Here in America we have an interesting and complicated history with Vietnam. While it's not our enemy anymore, not by any stretch of the imagination, the war that we fought there back in the 1960s and 1970s has definitely left our relationship with it a bit strained, to say the least, as is the case with France from what I understand, given their initial colonization. Now, the really interesting thing about Vietnam is that much like Cuba or China, we still approach Vietnam with Cold War sensibilities, which I find patently bizarre given Vietnam's recent modernization, during which it went from a third world country, say, to at the very least a second world country. I mean, it's definitely up there. It's one of the most prosperous Asian countries in the world today. The Vietnam War was unequivocally a massive waste of resources and time, one of the greatest disgraces in American history. Yet bizarrely, there is still apologetics for it to this day who defend the Vietnam War as some kind of noble crusade. And to that I just have to ask, how could you possibly defend war criminals like Vietnam veterans? Now, I understand the common excuse that goes around, that people who fought in Vietnam didn't understand the severity and impact of their behavior over there, and just what they were fighting on behalf of. But I think that's a really weak excuse, that you're not educated about politics. If you're a fucking idiot, like the Nazis were, for instance, during Hitler's rise to power, and you support that kind of shit, there really is no excuse. You shouldn't be fighting in a war if you don't understand what the war you're fighting in is about. Like, who the fuck would do that? That's why I think it's weird that there aren't more movies about, like, anti-war protesters during the Vietnam War, the people who burned their draft cards and organized protests on college campuses and the like. Because those were the people at the end of the day who actually fought on the correct side of the war and ended up making an actual difference in the way we think about protest and the First Amendment right to protest and civic change and civic responsibility. I can think of few people more heroic than the average college student back in the 60s who burned their draft card and said, "Fuck the Vietnam War, I'm staying right here in America, and if you don't like it, you can piss off because I live here and I don't give a shit about Vietnam or what happens to Vietnam." I think those are the most noble people in this scenario, but there are no films really exploring their legacy or what they really brought to the table. Likewise, there are very few films that document the Vietnam War from the side of the Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese Army, which I think is pretty strange. I mean, I'm sure there are over in Vietnam, but we don't see nearly enough of them here in America. I think the case is that America is a sore loser, and we can't stand that the Vietnam War is the only conflict that we lost because we had no business in it, and it was ridiculous for us to be there, and it was just a massive waste of time, resources, people, everything. One of the most absurd wars ever fought. So the fact that we still create films which portray these sorts of people as heroic or important or anything, when in reality most of them were mentally ill sociopaths, just kind of goes to show that while we might have come pretty far as a nation since the 1960s, we still perpetuate a lot of unhealthy stereotypes via film, and a lot of racist stereotypes, especially in Vietnam. I'm the weeb equivalent for, like, Vietnam and China, because I think Vietnam and China are, like, very culturally rich and interesting Asian countries, so I hope to visit Vietnam or China one day and check out what they've got going on. I think they're both fantastic countries, and I'd much rather visit them than just, like, Tokyo or something. You know, I'd rather go to Saigon, because they really have, like, some cool shit going on down there. For the time being, the only way that I can access the wonderful country of Vietnam is through the portal of film, and as it happens, there's a lot of crap here in America about Vietnam that just completely fails to accurately capture the conflict, given a historical perspective where you take into account the fact that the Americans were clearly in the wrong. As an American myself, I've often come into conflict and gotten a lot of flack for my outspoken position on the war, but here's the thing, right? Since I am a citizen of a country which was a participant in this war, It's my right to speak out about just how terrible this war was and what a horrible choice it was. And I think not a lot of people these days really understand just like how shit the Vietnam War was and like what a waste of time it was and how dumb the soldiers in it were. Like I don't hear that mentioned nearly enough. And back in the 60s, obviously, this was much more prevalent. You went to any young person back in the 1960s, any real American, and they'd be like, yeah, the Vietnam War is fucking shit. And these days it seems like the youth are just kind of confused about the subject. So let me make this clear unequivocally for those of you out there who might be too young to really understand geopolitics. The Vietnam War is stupid. We were in the wrong. We shouldn't have gone there, and it was dumb. For whatever reason, there's a lot of strange depictions of Vietnam in popular culture. In the Watchmen universe, for instance, Vietnam is the 51st state, which isn't what would have happened if we had won the Vietnam War, much like how when Pinochet overthrew Allende in Chile, which was sponsored by the CIA, Chile didn't become the 51st United State because that would have been stupid. Now this is, I think, only from the Watchmen show, so I don't know if Alan Moore signed off on this or approves it, but then again, I don't think Alan Moore has a very good grasp on American history because he makes his superhero comic set in Vietnam, and everyone in the Watchmen universe would actually like hate Dr. Manhattan and want him dead, much like how in the real world in the 1960s superheroes like Super Green Beret, which tried to capture the fervor of the World War II era comics for Vietnam, comics like that, the public hated them and wanted them to go because they were racist and lame and stupid. So I don't think anyone in the Watchmen universe would like cheer on the comedian or Dr. Manhattan. They'd probably just be like, publicly hated. Much like how a lot of Vietnam War criminals in the real world are publicly hated and despised as vicious monsters who committed unspeakable acts in a foreign country they had no business being in. But Watchmen aside, this video isn't about Watchmen, because I've already made a video about Watchmen. If you want to see my thoughts on Watchmen and how stupid Alan Moore is and how he doesn't understand American life or American politics, then you can go watch that. But today, just for the heck of it, I decided to rewatch 5 Vietnam War movies, all of which are about the Vietnam War, but to varying degrees of success. Some are good, some are bad, some are in the middle. So let's get to talking about the various ways in which the Vietnam War is depicted in American film. Kind of check it out, have a look over it, and yeah, this is my big Vietnam War movie review. Hope you enjoy. Okay, so the first Vietnam War movie I sat through was Da 5 Bloods, which is a Netflix original. You might be asking, how do I watch a Netflix original if I don't have a Netflix account? That's a great question. I'm not going to answer it. Suffice to say, Da 5 Bloods is one of the worst Vietnam War movies I've ever seen, along with being one of the worst blaxploitation movies I've ever seen. Blaxploitation is still a genre, although it's not as prevalent as it was back in the 1970s. Do you miss action heroes who are cool and awesome like Shaft or Dolomite or Coffee? Characters who like kill pimps and drug dealers and people who like really deserve it and are detrimental to society overall, and it's a good action spectacle. Well, forget all that. Spike Lee comes at us with 5 old racists who are just terrible characters. Every single one of them is just the worst guy. They all suck. They all make extremely racist jokes and comments about the Vietnamese people and the country of Vietnam. And they're all just so fucking lame. This is a terrible movie. And I think it's bizarre how like Spike Lee went from like classics like Do the Right Thing all the way to Da 5 Bloods. Like, what a fucking joke. The budget for this movie is apparently one of the highest Spike Lee's ever had, which I think is insane because like it looks cheap as fuck. It's just these 5 old guys walking around the forest for like an hour straight and a couple exterior shots of like Vietnam. I imagine most of the budget was spent securing a location in Vietnam and paying off the Vietnamese government to shoot this absolute cringe factory. This is just a terrible movie front to back. The action scenes look awful. There's like continuity errors about how high up the helicopter is during the flashback scene, which I thought was hilarious. All the blood looks fake as shit. It's just full of CGI blood. Whenever it goes back to a flashback scene, it's like they change the aspect ratio, because I guess Netflix doesn't understand that films in the 1960s had the same aspect ratio as films today. That saturated, colorless, bland Netflix production value that completely robs the life out of all cinematography and everything. The visual difference between an actual theatrically released movie like BlacKkKlansman and Da 5 Bloods is readily apparent. You can see in BlacKkKlansman Spike Lee actually making really great creative decisions. I'm surprised that BlacKkKlansman has like a lower budget than Da 5 Bloods. At least that's what the Wikipedia page for Da 5 Bloods leads me to assume. I mean, BlacKkKlansman had an insanely good production value. They rebuilt entire streets to look like the 70s, sets and costumes and everything. Da 5 Bloods is literally just these 5 Vietnam War veterans who are all lame and boring and have zero chemistry and they just act horrible. Like, at one point, the main guy, he's like, I am the motherfucker, but, Samuel L. Jackson, this guy ain't, so it just comes off as like a meme, like a royal meme there. Yeah, this movie is ridiculously bad. I don't know what Spike Lee was thinking. I think, as is the case with his Old Boy remake, which is also notoriously terrible, maybe he just isn't that good at, like, capturing Asian cultures, so he should kind of stick with what he knows, like the African American experience. His Old Boy remake was terrible, and that ruined Korea, so here he comes ruining Vietnam with Da 5 Bloods. Just a terrible film front to back. It's filled with just continuity errors and nonsense. Like in one scene, one of Da 5 Bloods steps on a landmine and gets blown up, and the guts that are pouring out of him looks like frickin' Fish Boy from House of a Thousand Corpses. It looks so ridiculously fake. It's like Tropic Thunder, but unironically, except whereas Tropic Thunder understands that you can't make the average Vietnamese people a villain anymore, so it makes it a drug cartel, which is realistic because there obviously are still drug cartels in Vietnam, as there are in every modern country. In Da 5 Bloods, it presents Vietnam as this inhospitable wasteland where if you just walk around the forest, you're likely to step on a landmine, which is not how actual Vietnam is, from my understanding. From my understanding, the Vietnamese government has gone in and removed all the landmines because the war has been over for like 50 fucking years, but I guess this movie, for whatever reason, chooses to conveniently ignore that. So what we get is a depiction of Vietnam where it's just like this giant jungle. There's tons of inhospitable Vietnamese people who want to kill the main characters. They step on 2 landmines within like 50 feet of each other, and the second landmine isn't even well hidden or anything. It's like the most obvious landmine possible. It's like your odds of stepping on 2 landmines sequentially in Vietnam is like winning the fucking lottery 5 times. Like, I really doubt, they just leave all these landmines out there for like the average, rice farmer to just step on while he's out taking a brisk morning hike or whatever. I'm pretty sure the Vietnamese government has the tools and capability to use a fucking metal detector out there and get the mines out, because it's not wartime anymore. That's been over for, again, like 50 years. This movie is also the final film role of Chadwick Boseman. I find it really sad that his only 2 film roles that anyone knows are Black Panther and Da 5 Bloods, because he was probably a really great actor. Much like Robert Downey Jr. and Scarlett Johansson, the Marvel money machine really spit him up and chewed him out. And it's a real disgrace to know that, this is his, last movie. He should have been in way more movies, because he's a good actor, but his talent was completely wasted. In this, he plays the character of Stormin Norman, who has a photo at one point, like an old black and white photo, but it looks fake as hell. All the old film footage looks fake as shit. I've never seen a faker looking movie, which is just bizarre considering that this is supposedly one of Spike Lee's most expensive films to date. That's just crazy to me. How? I think Spike Lee really works well when he's tackling the issue of African Americans being subjugated in American society, contemporary American society, or retro American society, as the case may be. That's why a movie like BlacKkKlansman delivers so well, is that it connects the past to the present in a way that's visually and thematically compelling. But you can't root for these 5 characters who are African Americans, but also systematically oppressing an entire country and fighting on behalf of American imperialism. I don't really think you can sympathize with these characters at all. And even more offensive is the fact that at the end Spike Lee decides to toss a clip of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in there. I guess without understanding that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was pretty much a progressive radical, a socialist, would absolutely be opposed to the war in Vietnam. I really doubt Malcolm X gave a shit whether or not Vietnam went communist, considering how progressive and forward-thinking the guy was. And furthermore, I really doubt Malcolm X gave that much of a shit about the Vietnam War because, he's worried about actual American civil rights, which is a pressing issue, at home in America. So I just find it really funny. It's hilariously out of touch that this film ends with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. MLK would not have liked these guys, nor would many civil rights leaders from the time period, because, civil rights is about civil rights, not about oppressing a country's civil rights and preventing them from attaining sovereignty. That's the opposite of civil rights, so I'm not sure what Spike Lee was going for here, putting a clip of MLK in at the end, but it's just a really nice little cherry on top of the shit sundae. Altogether, I'd say this is one of the most tone-deaf films about the Vietnam War I've ever seen. It's full of cliches, at the end, the villain, who's this bastard French guy, or maybe he's British or something, I don't know, vaguely European. He's about to shoot one of the 5 Bloods, but then right at the last second before he's able to shoot another of the 5 Bloods who's still alive, but the audience might have conveniently forgotten about, shoots the bad guy instead, which is just a cliche that anyone can see coming from a mile away. It's been in so many movies. Can we please start subverting these things and making new shit? Spike Lee can be subversive. He really can. He can switch up the audience's expectations if he tries. But I don't think he tried with this one. And yeah, it's just one of the most pathetic, lame, stupid stories I've ever seen. It's literally just watching 5 old weirdos stumble around in the Vietnam forest for an hour straight, and they're trying to find some gold, and it looks like a painted brick. It's some of the fakest looking gold I've ever seen, and the main character wears a MAGA hat. Spike Lee just incorporates all this random imagery as if he's making some kind of societal statement or something. But you'd never see Shaft or Dolomite wearing a MAGA hat. Why can't you just make a movie with a cool protagonist that the audience wants to follow along with? That was one of the main appeals of BlacKkKlansman, is that you liked Ron Stallworth and you wanted to see him defeat the KKK and David Duke, and it was an epic movie and it was cool and fun and exciting to watch. And that's something The 5 Bloods is definitely lacking. This is a hilariously bad film. I give The 5 Bloods 1 out of 10 stars. It's easily Spike Lee's worst, along with maybe Old Boy. It's just a terrible, terrible film. Ridiculously stupid, a waste of your time, Don't watch this. Yet another reason not to renew your Netflix subscription, or if you don't have one, good on you. Just buy movies on VHS, or just go to the movie theater. I guarantee there's something better playing than whatever's on Netflix.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Alright then, we're going from one of the worst Vietnam War movies to one of the best, Apocalypse Now, featuring Martin Sheen as Willard and Marlon Brando as Colonel Kurtz. This is generally regarded as not only one of the best war movies of all time, but just in general one of the best movies of all time. And while I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, I definitely see what people get out of it, and I definitely see why people like it. And I think that while this movie isn't the most interested in exploring the war itself, and isn't very interested in kind of the motives and wants and ideas of either side of enemy combatants, this is a great film if you want to learn how to put together very good shot composition. Every single frame in this is a painting. Every single landscape, every single shot is just like filled to the brim with detail and atmosphere, and it's just packed with tension. And I think that's very effective. A movie like this, where the goal is to build as much atmosphere and tension as possible, you just can feel the claustrophobia setting in as Martin Sheen and his ragtag group in their little boat make their way up the river towards Marlon Brando's insane jungle compound. Now, of course, we have an all-star cast, Marlon Brando in what is undoubtedly one of his best roles. We got Lawrence Fishburne, who's so young you wouldn't even notice it's Lawrence Fishburne. You have Dennis Hopper, and of course, you have Robert Duvall as Kilgore. I think this movie is just rife with imagery, like for instance Marlon Brando's death being juxtaposed with the sacrificial cow, because at the end of the day, that's kind of what Marlon Brando is. He's a bit of a sacrificial cow. You have the newspaper that reads about the Manson murders. Unlike in Quentin Tarantino's terrible film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, this actually makes sense because the film deals with themes of cult mentality and the cult that Marlon Brando is able to start up with Dennis Hopper. And of course Colby. You have the scenes of utter brutality between the Americans, such as when Kilgore runs across the guy who's holding his guts in with a pan lid, and he's like, anyone who can hold his guts in with a pan lid gets water out of my canteen, like he gives a shit about the guy. But then the minute he hears that Lance is there, he's like, oh shit, Lance the surfer, and he drops his canteen and just doesn't give the guy any more water, so I guess that guy's dead. It's bits like that which really kind of help to emphasize just what complete bastards these people are. You don't really feel sorry for any of them when they die, but that's not really the point to feel sorry for any of them. You don't even really like Martin Sheen. His existence as a character isn't really brought up. He doesn't really have any characteristics the viewer can latch onto. He's just there as a vessel by which the viewer can observe these various events in Vietnam War history, which I think is a clever decision. He's a very blank slate of a character. He's not really a character with any point or motive. He doesn't really want anything. He just does what he's asked to, and he's going to Marlon Brando no matter the cost. I think this film is extremely disturbing. It's up there with Cannibal Holocaust in terms of being an incredibly disturbing film, although it is a little more subtle than Cannibal Holocaust. Now, of course, there is some debate as to whether or not the film handles its subject matter respectfully. In particular, I've heard that a lot of Vietnamese people find the exclusively American perspective kind of distasteful. And I would have to agree. I think it's high time there was a Vietnam War movie from the perspective of the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army instead of the American Army, which is kind of boring. On the other hand, though, I think Apocalypse Now is about as close to like a legit Vietnam adventure story as the genre ever could have gotten. Not a story explicitly about the war itself, but an adventure set during the war, much like the World War II era adventure stories, which were never about the war directly, but rather about just the various mishaps and anecdotes that the combatants got into along the way. This is, of course, because it's adapted from Joseph Conrad's novel Heart of Darkness. That is a classic African colonialism adventure tale set in colonial Africa. I think the adventure roots of the narrative really are incorporated pretty well into the Vietnam War setting, which obviously is very different. But at the end of the day, it's a very similar story, white colonialism, imperialism, the Vietnam War being one of the only examples of imperialism on an American scale comparable to that of the British Empire back in the 1890s. So in that respect, I think it's very apt to adapt Heart of Darkness to an American setting. Colonel Kurtz is one of the greatest antagonists in film, and that's really saying something, considering he doesn't really even show up until the end of the movie, and he has very few lines, but the few lines that he does have really leave an impact on you as to just how broken this guy is. Obviously, Martin Sheen's character is terrified of becoming Colonel Kurtz, giving in to the darkness and kind of letting it fill him. In that way, it's a lot like Star Wars. I think Apocalypse Now is interesting in that Colonel Kurtz is essentially the American imperialist mindset carried out to its extreme, because Colonel Kurtz is completely without empathy or feeling towards his common man and is only dedicated to achieving victory by any means possible, even if that means committing the most horrible atrocities imaginable. He'll do absolutely anything because he sees it as a means to an end, which at the end of the day was pretty much the mindset going into the Vietnam War. In that way, Colonel Kurtz can be regarded as a kind of manifestation of the American presence in Vietnam, using the Vietnamese people against themselves, so to speak, which was the case with South Vietnam versus North Vietnam. Colonel Kurtz obviously really dislikes the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese and will do absolutely anything to stop them with his little band of renegades, and it's a pretty apt depiction, I would argue, of the way in which Vietnam pretty much turned on itself, and they're all, manner of splinter groups and factions and the like. But I think the cult mentality is such an interesting concept that really is not in any other war film to the same extent. The idea of a vindictive renegade leader who just will do absolutely anything to achieve his ends. Many of the shots are designed specifically to make the environment the characters find themselves in just completely alien, like the bit with the Playboy show. That bit is straight out of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. The stage and the lights just look completely foreign, completely alien. You have, the streaks across the lens. It's like that shit is really weird to look at. And furthermore, I just think the depiction of the American soldiers is very accurate. They're all crazy, they're all assholes, you don't like any of them. You're not supposed to like any of them. From what I've read, some soldiers actually identify with this movie, and, I guess it's a pretty accurate depiction of just what a bunch of, mindless assholes Vietnam War soldiers were. And they only get themselves into the trouble, right? The one guy, pulls out the smoke grenade so they can't see shit, and then they start getting hit by arrows. And it's you just fucked your own self up. The other guy just walks into the jungle, he's like, I want some mangoes. And then the tiger comes out, and he's like, oh dang, I shouldn't have wanted some mangoes. Just kind of recklessly endangering their lives. There's a lot of fourth wall breaking in here too, like when Martin Sheen steps out of the boat and there's a film crew there, and they're just make it look like you're fighting, even though they're not fighting. They're just burning down this entire village, and the village doesn't really stand a chance. It's not really a battle as much as it is a massacre. But that's very clever, It's like Martin Sheen knows he's in a movie. And of course that goes back to the way in which the Vietnam War was depicted in media of the time, state-sponsored media anyway, so as to make the Americans appear like these heroic saviors or some shit. And that's a very powerful message on propaganda. At the same time, you have the words Apocalypse Now scrawled right on the base of the Buddhist temple where Marlon Brando is hidden out. And I think that's very clever. It's like, oh, they're in the movie. That's the name of the movie, and that's their motto, and that's the movie. That's really clever. It's like everything is a movie, and just kind of a little subtle nod there. The soundtrack for this film is flippin' amazing. You got the End by the Doors at the beginning and the end. It just sounds great. It really meshes well. Start off with that shot of the trees, then Agent Orange creeps in, then slow-mo helicopters, then it all explodes once the drop comes and Jim Morrison's vocals come in. You have I Can't Get No Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones, and then you have the score of the film itself, which is composed of just this eerie, droning, hypnotic synth. It's kind of a trance film, kind of like Robert Altman's Three Women. If you like Three Women, you'll like Apocalypse Now. If you like Apocalypse Now, you'll like Three Women, vice versa. Do I think this movie is the best movie about the Vietnam War? No, not really. It's not really that witty or observant about the war itself. As I said, this is an adventure story which is primarily focused with just telling a story about a certain guy. It's not really about the war. It's more about the psyche of Marlon Brando and how he went so crazy. But this is just a great movie in terms of score, shot composition. It really is a cinematic experience that should be seen on the big screen with all the action, and definitely like the shot where Martin Sheen gets like flipped upside down by the tribe, and it like does a spin thing where he's in the mud. That's a really neat shot. Overall, I think this movie is a pretty accurate, historically accurate depiction of the Vietnam War. All the soldiers are assholes. Even Martin Sheen, you don't really like him. You just kind of follow along with him. And unlike American Psycho, which is also adapted off a book, and I've said before that I fucking hate the inner monologues in that because it just makes the main character seem like a self-absorbed dipshit. In Apocalypse Now, it's a really great example of how to do inner monologues correctly and really build up this character and build up tension and suspense as gradually Martin Sheen just learns more and more about Colonel Kurtz and what a screwed up guy he is. I especially like the scene where they're at the Playboy show, and the girls don't even strip or anything. They're just like in somewhat scantily clad outfits. It's really stupid, and they're not even showing their breasts or anything, but the soldiers are just so ridiculously horny. They're like, oh, I want you, I want you, I want you, come on, give me your autograph, and they swarm the stage, and then like two of them clutch onto the helicopter the girls are in, and it's like one of their pants comes off. It's so stupid, and it's such an accurate portrayal of these absolute losers. Francis Ford Coppola is on record saying that it's not explicitly an anti-war film, and I would kind of agree. It's not really the most like moral grandstand type of film. It doesn't say that what the people are doing is wrong, but you'd have to be kind of a sociopath, kind of have the wrong mentality in your head to think that what the people in the movie are doing is morally justified. It's absolutely contemptible and disgusting, to the same extent that what the film crew in Cannibal Holocaust does is contemptible and disgusting. So, yeah, I'd argue that, in essence, this is like on the same level of disturbing pretty much as Cannibal Holocaust. It really does accurately depict the brutality of war. But if you want, like, morality tale, Apocalypse Now doesn't really have that. But in terms of just being a really great, well-done movie, and I do think Colonel Kurtz does kind of represent, like, just the American mindset, the kind of obsessive-compulsive drive to win the war by any means necessary. I think Apocalypse Now can be read on that level, and on a lot of deep levels. It's a very thematic film. And it's a very well shot and composed and edited film. And it's a good example of well done filmmaking. So I give Apocalypse Now about an 8.5 out of 10. It's a great film, and I definitely recommend watching it. And it's the kind of film where you kind of have to draw your own conclusions about who's in the right, who's in the wrong. If anybody's in the right, maybe they're all in the wrong. It's a very morally complex film with a lot of morally complex characters and just a killer atmosphere and a ton of attention to detail. So yeah, I highly recommend it, and that's about all I have to say about Apocalypse Now. I mean, it's been talked about by plenty of other people who are way smarter than me in terms of film analysis and the way a film looks and, you know, what all that means, so I'll cut myself off here, but just rest assured, it is a good movie and you probably should check it out. Alright then, we're going back into a terrible Vietnam War movie now. We're kind of feeling a bit of tonal whiplash here. I'm talking about Good Morning Vietnam with Robin Williams. Holy shit. If people raise the complaint with Apocalypse Now that its America-centric casting and story perspective is insulting to the people of Vietnam, then holy shit, can you imagine what the people of Vietnam must think about a movie which is entirely just from the perspective of Robin Williams? This is a ridiculous movie. This is a farce and an embarrassment, and easily one of Robin Williams' worst. Now, I've said this in the past, but I really don't think Robin Williams is anywhere near, like, the best comedians. He's not in my ranking of, like, the worst comedians. You know, it's kind of on a scale. Bottom, you got, like, Pauly Shore, Tim Allen. Top, you got guys like Phil Hartman, David Spade, Adam Sandler, Ben Stiller, you know. In the middle, you have, like, Tony Shalhoub. You have, like, Robin Williams, you know, like, they're kind of funny. They've been in some funny movies, but more often than not, it's a complete miss. Like, aside from Mrs. Doubtfire, I don't know what anyone sees in a Robin Williams comedy. The only reason anyone gives a shit about Robin Williams as a comedian, and I'm going to be honest here, is because he's dead. Before he was dead, nobody really gave a shit. They were just like, oh, a Robin Williams comedy, okay. Here's something to distract our kids for 2 hours because he's the genie from Aladdin and they know him from that, so they'll be entertained by his goofy voices and goofy faces. But given that I'm over the age of 12, I've kind of matured past the Robin Williams phase. Good Morning Vietnam, much like Toys, which I reviewed a while back, is a Robin Williams-focused vanity project where he presents himself as the most forward-thinking comedy messiah. There are a ton of these, you know, Patch Adams too. He's just like the funniest, most likable guy. And this is a big problem, especially for what is presumably a comedy. The reason Adam Sandler movies work, for instance, is because Adam Sandler always presents himself as a down-on-his-luck underdog who gets, like, shit on by the world, you know. And you want to root for a character like that because you want to see them succeed because they haven't gotten their due credit, you know. Every Adam Sandler character is a bit of a loser who's despised by society. On the other hand, every Robin Williams character is just the golly gee cleanest flippin' greatest guy who you just can't help but like, and everyone automatically likes him, and everyone goes bananas over him. And it's like, how self-centered do you have to be to write the same exact movie over and over and over again, where you just write yourself as this great guy who everyone likes and everyone thinks is the funniest guy on earth? It's a fantasy. Nobody would see Robin Williams in the real world and go, this guy is so fucking funny, I'm going to have a heart attack from how hilarious his jokes are. In Good Morning Vietnam, Robin Williams plays a radio correspondent who's deployed to Vietnam during the Vietnam War. And as you would expect, his radio show, get this, is a bit subversive, and he makes funny voices and impersonates the Wizard of Oz and Muppets and shit. And it's just like 2 hours of Robin Williams making funny voices. Now I'll say this, can Robin Williams sound like Michael Jackson or whatever? Sure. Is that necessarily funny? No, not really. In fact, it gets really old once you've heard it once. Like in Aladdin, he's able to animate and shapeshift into different forms because he's a genie, So when he does his goofy Bing Crosby voice, then he'll shapeshift into a little genie Bing Crosby. But in Good Morning Vietnam, it's literally just watching Robin Williams sit there and make funny voices for 2 hours straight. That's a bit of an oversimplification. There is a plot. This is the plot. People like Robin Williams' hilarious comedy radio show. The entirety of Saigon can't get enough of Robin Williams and his hilarious radio show where he makes funny voices all day. And then the higher-ups in the army are a bunch of bastards who don't like fun. And they're like, you can't make funny voices on your radio show. And Robin Williams is like, screw you, I'm going to make funny voices on my radio show. And that's basically the whole movie. He just kind of makes funny voices. He doesn't make any deep political statement about how fucked up the war is or anything, because obviously if he did that, they'd just fire him and send him back to America immediately. So he just impersonates the seven dwarves and shit, and it's not funny, and it's not interesting, and it's not intellectually stimulating at all. There's really nothing to this movie. He goes to Beach Blanket Bingo at one point, and it's the Vietnamese version, and it's in subtitles. He goes to a Vietnamese restaurant, and then the Vietnamese restaurant blows up, and it's supposed to be this big, impactful scene. But it's really not, because, a couple scenes earlier, Robin Williams is just making a goofy Rodney Dangerfield impression or whatever, so you really can't take any of this shit seriously. It's like a massive joke. Here's an idea, and I think this would improve the movie a lot. Suppose Robin Williams wasn't a radio broadcaster working on behalf of the United States government. And here's an idea. I know this is crazy, but I bet I can write a movie better than Robin Williams. Let's say that Robin Williams is a renegade CB radio and ham radio operator who traveled to Vietnam of his own volition and is dedicated to spreading the truth across the airwaves as much as possible. And he chants slogans like, "America is full of pigs," and the like. And the American government can't find him because he's secluded himself out in the jungle or something, and he's made a lot of friends with the Viet Cong. Wouldn't that be a much more wholesome and entertaining movie? It'd also be historically relevant considering that the 1960s was pretty much the first decade where CB radio and ham radio was really taken advantage of as a means by which the public could educate themselves free of government control, because those radio frequencies weren't really monitored as much as the standard AM/FM radio frequencies are by the FCC. That could be an interesting plot if Robin Williams was actually some kind of renegade countercultural figure who defied the government and spread information freely throughout Vietnam like a kind of folk hero. But that's not what this movie is about. This movie is about Robin Williams being a lame government stooge, and the only thing he does that's even remotely brave in quotations, of course, because it's not like he gets executed for this or anything. They just fire him. He just says, "Hey, this guy's restaurant blew up." And it's like, yeah, we already know that. We already saw it. I guess the point is that the army doesn't want the public to know that bombs are going off in Saigon. You'd think the government would want people to know that. It seems like useful information to broadcast, but whatever. This movie is just a terrible film all around. It really displays just how Robin Williams is really insufferable sometimes if you give him too much to do and you just give him too much of a movie. And I get it, everyone's like, he was a master improvisationer. He was so good at improv and improvisation. And I'm sure, maybe he is. Maybe all his lines in this movie are thought up of on the spot. But on the other hand, all my videos are entirely unscripted, so everything I'm saying right now is pretty much, free-form stream of consciousness thoughts. So it's not like I can't do anything Robin Williams can do. He just makes funny voices on the fly. "Hi, I'm Michael Jackson." Okay, Robin. Alright, great. Robin Williams makes friends with like this Vietnamese kid. It's this really nauseating cultural appropriation bullshit. It's obviously just like, look, Robin Williams has a Vietnamese pal. And then it turns out that the kid is working on behalf of the Viet Cong or North Vietnamese military. I forget. This movie is boring. And Robin Williams is like, you bastard! You traitor! You piece of shit! How dare you fight for your own people in your own country? I'm Robin Williams. Aren't I a funny man? Don't you want to be my pal? How dare you pal around with your own people and fight for your own country? And it's like, just shut up, Robin Williams. What are you doing in Vietnam? You don't belong here. Just go home. Nobody needs you here. There's a scene where Robin Williams pulls up next to this truck full of soldiers and he's like, look, I have a clown nose, honk honk. And the soldiers are like, wow, Robin, you're so damned funny. How do you do it? How are you such a comedy maestro? And Robin Williams is like, you're gonna tune into my radio show today, aren't you, boys? And the soldiers are like, yeah, Robin, we sure as hell are. You're the funniest man. You give us reason to go on living. If I was a soldier in Vietnam and all I had to listen to all day on my radio was Robin Williams making goofy voices, just switching from random character to random pop culture character for like an hour straight, that would be hell. That's worse than Apocalypse Now, honestly. That's a disturbing prospect right there. So anyway, the movie wraps up with Robin Williams, as you would expect, getting fired and sent back to America because he's too much of a loose cannon and the U.S. government doesn't want this whack job on air. And it's about the ending you would expect. Really empty film, terrible pacing, goofy as hell concept. This is like the biggest, just ego-stroking vanity project it's possible to make. You just make yourself the best character, everyone likes you. Well, everyone except the uptight bastards, of course, who want to shut Robin Williams' hilarious comedy hour down. Robin Williams, I think, really needed some kind of, like, reality check. Because Dan Aykroyd, he ain't. I could not listen to this guy for an hour straight. And I'm sure there are plenty of people who have. I'm sure plenty of people have listened to an entire Robin Williams comedy special. I don't get it. I don't get who thinks this guy is funny. He's not that funny, and most of his movies are lame. Mrs. Doubtfire is funny because he's in drag, but I think Jack and Jill is a much better movie about drag. And anyone who denies that is pretty bad at recognizing what actual humor constitutes. Anyway, Good Morning Vietnam is just an absolute shit show. One of the most insensitive movies about the Vietnam War, especially since you take this horrible tragedy and make it all about yourself and put yourself in the middle of the action and go, hot diggity, I'm the funniest guy in Vietnam. That's really insensitive. It'd be like if there was like some kind of movie, you know, set in like Biafra or something. You know, it's not exactly the most charming of times. It's not exactly the funniest scenario. And, you know, I'm sure a competent comedian could make something funny out of it. But Robin Williams doesn't even joke about being in Vietnam or the injustice of man against man or anything. He literally is just like, I'm gonna do the Wizard of Oz, but it's Vietnam themed. Yeah, really pathetic movie. I give Good Morning Vietnam 2 out of 10 stars. It's just a miserable slog to watch. It's not funny, it's not compelling, it's not sad, it's not anything really. You'll end watching this movie really bored. There's no action, despite being set during wartime, except that one point where there's a giant explosion. Robin Williams, of course, isn't hurt because he's an invulnerable god, and to show any vulnerability or him getting injured or anything would be too much. So it's just, he just breaks the rules and lives and flies back home with a fat paycheck And thank you for bringing hilarity to the country of Vietnam, Robin. You absolute saint. You absolute god-tier comedian, you. Yeah, this movie is terrible, and I'm done talking about it. 2 out of 10 stars. Next. Time to talk about what is definitely my favorite film out of the bunch I watched, that being Stanley Kubrick's 1987 classic, Full Metal Jacket. Wow, does this film have a lot going for it, and any time I mention good films that are about the Vietnam War, I typically bring up Full Metal Jacket, because man oh man does this movie just take the complete piss out of the Vietnam War as a conflict. There is not another movie that you can watch that makes you less excited about the Vietnam War. It's absolutely hilarious in some places and absolutely haunting in other places. I respect Kubrick because whatever genre he sets out to make, he makes successfully. If he sets out to do a sci-fi, he does it great. If he sets out to do a war movie, he does it great. If he sets out to do a horror movie, he does it frickin' great. He's great at all the genres, and he never did the same genre twice, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. Now, I didn't know this before looking into it, but apparently some people have criticized the film's second half as feeling disjointed, which is like by design. That's the point, is that the first part with Gomer Pyle is like the more structured part, and the part where they're actually in Vietnam is the less structured part. Because I think this structure kind of makes the part that isn't in Vietnam feel more impactful to the characters and their story. This movie is really different from other Vietnam War movies in that like the first 45 minutes are just in the United States and aren't even in Vietnam. And then the part that is in Vietnam is just like the most actionless, boring stuff you can imagine. Like the end. The end is great because there's like 6 of them, or there's like 8 of them to begin with, and they all go in one by one, and they just get picked off like flies. And they're like, J-Doc and 8-Ball are in there, and they're like, we gotta go in and get them. And then like 4 of them die, and then the sniper is just this like woman, and they just feel so bad about it. It's fantastic. It's so subversive. It's so like different from any other Vietnam War movie. I've never seen another Vietnam War movie that pulls as many stops as this. It just completely defies your expectations, like the part where Bird is the Word starts playing. This movie uses period era music really well, which is something that, again, a lot of Vietnam War movies do. Apocalypse Now, like I said, has Rolling Stones and Doors in it. But with Full Metal Jacket, the intention is obvious that it's trying to make it like really goofy with Bird is the Word, which is just the stupidest pop hit from the 60s imaginable. Obviously, the part with the drill sergeant is the best. Mr. Ermey really shows his stuff here with classic lines like Jesus' birthday, and they sing happy birthday to Jesus, and it's just great. It's such a fantastic depiction of not only brainwashing, which Kubrick was obviously big into psychology and the like, and like the mob mentality. Obviously this stuff is stuff that like real drill sergeants actually said, and it just sounds and looks so stupid when you see it like on the big screen, you know, up close and personal. You see just how like stupid this shit is, and what a massive waste of time it is for everyone involved. Just like how destructive to the psyche it is, and how bad it is for developing people, and all the characters are just really lame and boring, and they're stupid, and they're all idiots, which is such a great and accurate depiction of soldiers in Vietnam. The section with the interview in particular is very revealing. it's just crammed with like jokes about how stupid they are and how they have no idea what they're doing there, and they're just full of shit. Fantastic. This is an extremely refreshing take on the Vietnam War. Like twice they get a prostitute, and both times they're just like the most stupid, horny bastards imaginable, and they have zero respect for the people or culture. They're just there for the prostitute. You'll also notice that in both scenes with the prostitutes, they like bargain, like, I'm only paying $5 for the prostitute. And then the prostitute will be like, 15, and they're like, no, $5. It's little touches like that that really help communicate just what a bunch of worthless bastards these people are. I also like the subversion of the trope. Like in Apocalypse Now, they all have the names, you know, they go around the whole squad. This is a very common thing in Vietnam War movies, where like, you know, oh, that's Chef, oh, that's Mr. Clean, right? But in Full Metal Jacket, it's like all their names are so stupid. They're the Lust Hog Squad, and you got like J-Doc and 8-Ball and Animal Mother, and they're just such stupid names that you're like, holy shit, these people don't sound cool at all. They're not cool or admirable, and the best scene, I think, is where the sniper dies at the end, and whoever got this actress, she's the best actress for the part, because her eyes are just so fucking haunting. It's so creepy to see her like die, and she's just like, shoot me, shoot me. She says this, prayer in Vietnamese. Just fantastic stuff all around. Kubrick knew his shit. For whatever reason, some people dislike this entry in Kubrick's filmography, but I really think it's fantastic, and more people ought to see it. I mean, a lot of people have seen it, but if you haven't seen it, you should see it. I recommend this one even more than Apocalypse Now. It's kind of like the anti-Apocalypse Now. If Apocalypse Now is a story of high adventure and stakes and tension, Full Metal Jacket is a story with like zero tension, where everyone's a complete idiot and they're all in a world of shit, as the quote goes. Yeah, I will say the first half is a lot more entertaining, and you can just watch the first half, but the second half should be watched too, because it really is just Kubrick at work, you know, a real master, and I think the whole film is interesting, and its structure is just one of the charming little things about it. Why is there this sharp needle in my coat? I give Full Metal Jacket a score of like 9.5 out of 10. Much like everything Kubrick made, with the exception of Dr. Strangelove, which I'll always hate because Peter Sellers is devoid of humor and nobody can tell me otherwise. Much like everything Kubrick directed, Full Metal Jacket is a fantastic little masterpiece, and I'm really glad Warner Bros., had the exclusive contract with him and just let him go to town on The Shining and all that, because man, he really proves his stuff with this one. Full Metal Jacket is about the best Vietnam War movie you could ask for. It's very anti-war, it's extremely subversive, it's extremely edgy, and it's also extremely funny at points, and it's not afraid to make you go, wow, this Vietnam War shit sure is cringe, and that's why it's my favorite movie on this whole list, because it really goes where no other Vietnam War movie goes, and just like showing what a bunch of stupid losers all these Vietnam soldiers are. So, thumbs up.
The war is over for me now, but it will always be there, the rest of my days.
The last movie I watched for the purposes of this video was 1986's Platoon, directed by Oliver Stone. Now I can see why among directors Oliver Stone has always been seen as a bit of a joke. I previously had watched his movie The Doors, and unlike The Doors, where at least you have the captivating personality of Val Kilmer as Jim Morrison to hook you in, Platoon has nothing. It has no character you can latch onto. It lacks both the incredible cinematography of Apocalypse Now and the incredible writing of Full Metal Jacket. so there really is nothing there to carry you through it. This is an extremely boring film. It's just 2 hours of constant slog, melodramatic drivel. Oliver Stone just hamming it up for 2 hours straight. This is a movie that feels like nothing happens, as are most Oliver Stone films, because his movies are the equivalent of a National Enquirer magazine, where everything is an exploitative, schlocky spectacle, and he just sits there and revels in the drama like a little goblin. Looky, I'm Oliver Stone. Aren't I provocative? Give me an Oscar, please. I swear, that's Oliver Stone for you. You have Charlie Sheen in the main role, which is especially bizarre given that Martin Sheen is his father, and Martin Sheen's inner monologues in Apocalypse Now are incredible, whereas in this movie, Charlie Sheen is just a whiny little bastard, and his inner monologues are excruciating to listen to. He really hams it up for the camera, really acts his noggin off. And it's especially weird because Martin Sheen and Charlie Sheen, being father and son, look and sound kind of similar. But I can definitely see why Charlie Sheen is a bit of a meme actor, up there with like Mel Gibson, and he's seen as a big meme, especially that winning speech he gave a couple years back. Because, man, this is the kind of actor who, has long since gone out of favor. He's just a big hunk of meat there for the camera, and he just reads the lines like a flat soda. It's so boring and so stupid and so schlocky. Now, Oliver Stone is himself a veteran of the Vietnam War, and this movie, out of all the ones I've watched, feels the most like pro-Vietnam War propaganda. This feels like a movie thoroughly funded by the interests of the United States military in order to depict the United States Army in Vietnam as the most heroic force, a righteous crusade of bold warriors. Seriously, this movie just kisses the United States ass. It's not even remotely critical of the war. It depicts some of the horrors of war, but in a way that paints the members of the platoon as the victims. Like, there's this one scene where Charlie Sheen falls asleep and he wakes up covered in mosquito bites, and it looks so gosh dang hilarious. Like, there's these prosthetic mosquito lumps all over his face. And he's like, "Oh, I'm suffering so much. I'm having such a rough time of it out here in Nam." And it's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry for you, Charlie Sheen. It must be so hard to perpetuate imperialism and rob a country of its independence. Man, you must be having a rough time of it there. Poor you. Oh gosh dang, this is so sad." Yeah, this movie is really tone deaf, and despite Apocalypse Now being a million times more disturbing, this movie wishes it was disturbing, because there's a scene where like this Vietnamese village is raided, but it lacks the subtlety of Apocalypse Now, it lacks the foresight, it lacks just the excellent writing and characters like Bill Kilgore. Really, I would argue that the more edgy this movie tries to be, the more provocative it really just ends up looking like a giant circus. Now, obviously, Oliver Stone, being a veteran of the Vietnam War, has a particular bias about the war. I think Apocalypse Now benefits from being made in 1979, which was soon enough after the war to kind of maintain it as like a cultural and political milestone in American history, still very much a contemporary thing, whereas 1979 was far away enough from the end of the war for it to be kind of handled very well in retrospect and thought about very well in retrospect. But Platoon was made all the way in 1986, which is a year before Full Metal Jacket, even though Full Metal Jacket seems like a freaking classic at this point. Platoon follows the central conflict between Sergeant Barnes, who's the bad sergeant, and Sergeant Elias, played by Willem Dafoe, who's the supposedly good sergeant. Under this reductive moral framework, Sergeant Barnes is painted as one bad egg, one bad apple amongst the bushel, whereas Sergeant Elias is painted as this noble, wonderful, messianic figure who only does right and is a great role model for Charlie Sheen and teaches everyone the right way to go about things. But this is the issue with that sort of narrative, right? Anyone who participated in the Vietnam War, unless they were on the side of the North Vietnamese army, was committing a horrible injustice. It's a lot like the slogan, all cops are bastards, right? Not all cops are bastards, but they all belong to a system which helps to perpetuate injustice, and that's what the slogan is referring to. If you participate in a system which is morally and fundamentally corrupt, you cannot grandstand yourself as this bold hero who stands out from amongst the pack. You can only make a moral grandstand if you actively choose to reject the moral corruption that surrounds you. So, I have a new slogan here, and this might sound a little crazy, but if you're an actual leftist, you should be able to get this through your head. All Vietnam War veterans are dipshits, and there's no reason to honor any of them, there's no reason to treat any of them as heroic figures, there's no need to defend any of them. What they did in Vietnam is unequivocally wrong and messed up, and it's fine to admit that. And as an American, I'm all too happy to admit that and apologize for what my people did over in Vietnam. It's not that difficult to do. It's been over for 50 years, so at this point, Americans should just be able to say, yeah, we fucked up. But for whatever reason, we can't seem to do that, and garbage like Platoon keeps being made. I'm pretty sure it's a movie like Platoon that Tropic Thunder is directly taking the piss out of, because, like, this is the most stereotypical, generic, garbage Vietnam War movie possible. You have all the cliches, all the guys have their stupid names. I'm Tex. Hey, I'm King. None of them have real names. They all have these stupid pseudonyms, which I don't even know if that was a thing in the Vietnam War. I guess it was. And there's all these melodramatic scenes where, oh, they get shot up, oh, they're getting killed, oh no. But every time one of the North Vietnamese army or Viet Cong comes out of the brush and stabs one of the bastards, I'm like, fuck yes. These losers really had it coming to them. They're really getting shown up, aren't they, huh? Heck yeah, Viet Cong, all the fucking way. Like, it's just so goofy to make a movie like this. At the end it says, like, dedicated to all the men who fought and died in Vietnam. You know, because Oliver Stone is a Vietnam War veteran. Imagine if there was a dedication like that at the end of a competent movie like Full Metal Jacket, right? Wouldn't happen. The reason Full Metal Jacket works so well is because the battle at the end isn't really a battle as much as it is a completely avoidable waste of life, where the only enemy is like one lady with a gun, and they just go in one by one after the other, and they all just get shot up, and you don't feel bad for them because they're all painted as idiots. Whereas in Platoon, the final battle is epic, and there's all the rockets going off, and you see Charlie Sheen running in slow-mo to save the day. Oh, what a noble guy. Anyone who criticizes the second half of Full Metal Jacket as being directionless really is a dumbass, because that's the point, is that the war is directionless. It has no point, like how the movie has no point. Platoon tries to force a point in there, some kind of epic moral statement like, oh, Charlie Sheen has grown as a man, and his two role models, Sergeant Burns and Sergeant Elias, have helped shape him and craft him from a little youngin' into a big man. Honestly, it's so fucking stupid. This movie is just full of shit. You know, this movie's a real embarrassment to cinema. Cinema is a medium. But in 2019, it was selected for preservation in the National Film Registry, which is like including The Birth of a Nation in the National Film Registry, if I'm gonna be honest, because Platoon is just about as insensitive and tone-deaf as any propaganda film made on behalf of any hate group. Like I said, out of all the films I watched, this one felt the most like propaganda, although I'm not even sure why anyone would want to make a Vietnam War era propaganda movie about how great America is, because all this movie really shows is that America sends its troops out into battle unprepared and fighting with each other and without adequate supplies. I mean, what's there to be proud of there? What kind of propaganda does that make for? It doesn't make me feel proud of my country. It makes me look at my country like my country is full of losers and jackasses. So it's not even effective as propaganda, even though that's obviously what it's attempting to be. I don't know what Oliver Stone sees in this movie or why he felt compelled to make it. He should have just left Vietnam and just got therapy and worked through his own problems instead of subjecting everyone to his asinine bullshit on a national level with this giant bloated 2-hour feature film of dreck. But hey, it's Platoon, and it's Oliver Stone's masterful Oscar-winning vision on display here. Platoon has received quite a bit of criticism in that none of the black characters are fleshed out, and they're all portrayed as like cowards, and none of them are like of a high rank, which yeah is kind of racist. I will agree, is that like the black characters in this don't really have the most like developed characteristics or anything, and they're not very well written. None of the characters are well written. On the other hand, though, there's nothing to celebrate about like a black guy in the Vietnam War. He was only there because the United States knew that he would make for cheap cannon fodder. It's not like you can like celebrate that as some kind of insane war heroism or some kind of like solution to segregation or something. The only reason black people were allowed in the Vietnam War is because the United States military-industrial complex knew from the outset that in all likelihood they were going to die over there. So it's not like this is inspiring, you know. It's not like it's inspiring that there were black guys in the Vietnam War. It's just depressing. Overall, yeah, I think Platoon is a massive waste of your time. I would not recommend watching it. It's not Apocalypse Now, and it ain't Full Metal Jacket. And to think that this came out the year before Full Metal Jacket and feels way more dated, and at the same time Full Metal Jacket feels way more like an instant classic that deserves every bit of praise it's gotten, because by gosh, Full Metal Jacket is, I think, the best Vietnam War movie currently to exist. Yeah, Platoon is just a giant slap in the face to anyone who would dare make a Vietnam War movie with even the slightest bit of like, you know, dark humor tossed in there, a little bit of self-awareness, a little bit of, you know, complex thought. This is a movie completely devoid of complex thought, where the Americans are just the good guys and the North Vietnamese army are just the bad guys, and we're expected to sympathize with these absolute asshats and be like, oh, I hope they win, even though, you know, they don't win. They're fucking losers and they fucking lose, and it's like, okay, boring. Anyway, Platoon, yeah, what a snooze fest. I give it like 3.5 out of 10. It's not terrible, but it is insanely mediocre, and the only thing going for it is that Oliver Stone is a director who knows how to write a script, I guess, like a very basic, rudimentary script, and the actors are directed okay. He does his job, but he's nothing special, and he's certainly not Francis Ford Coppola or Stanley Kubrick. So, yeah, Platoon gets 3.5 out of 10 stars. It is a waste of your time. It was a waste of my time. I thoroughly disliked every minute of this movie, and it's bad. So that's my review of 5 Vietnam War movies. That was an interesting experience to watch all 5 of these back to back. I feel like I've just spent a week over in Nam. What's really interesting about watching all 5 of these is the different ways in which they depict the conflict, the war, the people, the different tones they approach, same setting with. And that's always interesting to see, like how different movies approach the same subject material and the different choices each director takes and kind of the different feeling it gets. And that's especially the case with a complex subject like the Vietnam War. So I have to say, I think that this experience was pretty eye-opening for me. I maintain that a lot of Vietnam War movies are boring, a lot of them are stupid, a lot of them are really bland, generic, garbage. I also maintain, of course, that Full Metal Jacket is the best one. After that, I put Apocalypse Now. After that, Platoon. After that, Good Morning Vietnam. And on the bottom, I rank Da 5 Bloods as the worst of the bunch. That's my best to worst ranking. Yeah, Full Metal Jacket, Apocalypse Now, Platoon, Good Morning Vietnam, and then Da 5 Bloods. Best to worst, that's how I rank them up. I just find it interesting that the Vietnam War is approached in a very interesting way. Unlike how World War II is approached, heck, even unlike how the War on Terror is approached, because the Vietnam War movies have to cope with the fact that they're being made by people who are fundamentally on the wrong side of history. That's the responsibility we as Americans assumed when we entered the war, and the possibility we faced is that we would lose and we'd end up looking like big shitheads on the world stage, and that's exactly what happened. The question going forward into the future is how the Vietnam War will be depicted. As time moves on, are we going to become more enlightened, more forward-thinking, more progressive, more socially enlightened? Or are we going to become more ignorant? Are we going to forget about all the atrocities we committed over in Vietnam, make excuses for the soldiers, treat them like good people, which they absolutely are not? Which way are we going to go? I will argue that Vietnam War movies are worth making. And as Americans, we have the right to make them because we were participants in the conflict. But with that, we have to treat the conflict with a decent, mature amount of respect and tact and clever, witty, subversive writing that changes things up and doesn't just paint us as the heroes. You know, we have to be accurate. We have to be fair to the people of Vietnam who we wronged. So I hope that the next generation of filmmakers is able to tell the story of the conflict in a much more interesting and thought-provoking way, and explore new angles of it. I hope that's the case because, as I said, I have encountered really stupid people who, like, defend the South Vietnamese as some kind of oppressed group or actually hate Ho Chi Minh. Like, some brainwashed suckers still actually argue that Ho Chi Minh isn't one of the most influential and respectable leaders in world history. You'd have to be seriously brain dead to still be shitting on Ho Chi Minh in 2023. Holy shit. This isn't the Cold War anymore. Grow the fuck up. I'd like to end this video with a little addendum. In high school, I was forced to read a terrible book by the name of The Things They Carried by an author named Tim O'Brien. Tim O'Brien, I thought, starting the book off, I thought he was an actual Vietnam War veteran, and I started the book out thinking it was going to be schlocky and stupid, just like Platoon. And it was, but on the other hand, Tim O'Brien was a really great writer, and I was compelled by the stories, and I thought, wow, he's actually able to build quite a bit of character dynamics and atmosphere here. Then one day, the teacher just revealed to us that the entire thing was a work of fiction, and Tim O'Brien was never even a Vietnam War veteran, and he had just fucking lied about the whole thing, and written this entire biography, this entire short story collection, because he wished he had gone to Vietnam, and he was like, I'm gonna write a story about Vietnam, and it's gonna be cool, and I'm gonna invent all these characters. And I think that's the wrong way to go about telling a story about the Vietnam War. That's insanely exploitative. To pretend like you were a veteran of a war you never participated in. How sick do you have to be to do that? Yeah, the things they carried is an absolute shit show of a book, and I'm surprised that it was actually used in a high school curriculum. It's a clown book. It's an embarrassment to Vietnam War literature in general, literature in general. I think Tim O'Brien is an insanely compelling liar. He's very good at making you believe the bullshit he espouses, but at the end of the day, all he does is write about experiences he never had and pretends to have them. We listened to this thing he did where he talked about how when he was like 5 he wrote a story called Timmy of the Little League, where he was a Major League Baseball player and won the World Series or some shit. And then as an adult he took the exact same approach to fiction, just plopping himself in the storyline and painting himself as the hero. When I guess nobody told him that that's not how adults write novels. Adults write novels with fictional characters who aren't just character inserts, and they sure as hell aren't named the same thing as the author, because that's confusing when you have to distinguish between Tim O'Brien the author and Tim O'Brien the character, who's not the same person but has the same exact family and the same exact life and the same exact look and everything. Suffice to say, it was one of the worst books I've ever read, and is a great example of Vietnam War literature that just tries to exploit the conflict for a cheap dollar. So, as a prominent leftist, I'm going to give Hollywood some ideas for Vietnam War themed movies free of charge here at the end. You can take any of these ideas and run with them, and I guarantee they'll be a million times better than Platoon. There can be great movies about the Vietnam War. Full Metal Jacket is proof of that. It's an insanely competent film, and it says what it wants to. Alright, my first idea is for a movie told from the perspective of the Viet Cong. Make it like Platoon, make it just as gratuitous, make it just as schlocky, make it just as, these guys are heroes. Have a character who's like the Vietnamese equivalent of Charlie Sheen, this rugged badass who eats nails for breakfast, but get this, he's Vietnamese, so the audience can actually follow him along and be like, fuck yeah, you kill those American bastards, you hero. That's a great movie right there. Has never been done, and should be done, because the war's been over for 50 years and we're not enemies with Vietnam anymore. Heck, you could probably shoot it in Vietnam for free. The Vietnamese government would probably fund it. If there was a movie like that that actually celebrated the heroism of these bold warriors, the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army, marching in unison towards Saigon against the American threat, then man oh man, would that be a movie that I would go see, because that sounds damn interesting. Something from the Vietnamese perspective. You get an all-Vietnamese cast, and they all play their bold ancestors, ready to charge. That sounds awesome. Because not only did Vietnam actually win in real life, so they were actually the heroes of the scenario, but it would be a really cool war movie, and you could actually make characters who win and are cool and are awesome badasses, just like Charlie Sheen. There's a fun idea for you. Go make that movie. Alright, my second idea for a movie, not about the Vietnam War, but there's a big problem in Vietnam War movies like Da 5 Bloods and Platoon, where you pretend like black people serving in Vietnam was some kind of milestone. But it actually wasn't, because there were also plenty of black soldiers back in World War II, which was actually a war that America needed to fight because it was against fascism. And there weren't just a bunch of black people drafted involuntarily into a war they didn't want to be in. A lot of black guys actually signed up to be in World War II, get this, of their own volition, because they wanted to end fascism and stop Hitler. And that is an insanely noble cause. So here's an idea. Make a movie about a cool, badass squadron of black guys in Europe in World War II fighting their way across France and Italy, through the trenches, across the fields. Everyone would watch that, and it would be way, way, way cooler than Da Five Bloods, because these would actually be characters who you're interested in learning about, the history of, the heritage of, what their thoughts are on fascism of the time, because Hitler wasn't just anti-Semitic, he was also a huge racist towards black people. So there was actually a case there where a lot of black guys signed up for the U.S. Army during World War II. And those are the actual heroes that we should be making movies about and celebrating. Because gosh dang it, World War II was a war worth fighting at the end of the day. But there really aren't any World War II movies that celebrate the African American heroes of that age. And too many movies set in Vietnam that act like these black guys who, all things considered, weren't as oppressed a group as the frickin' Vietnamese people whose villages got burned down. So yeah, there's an idea for a movie. Lucasfilm has already kind of done it with Red Tails, but there were a lot of other African American divisions in World War II and a lot of squadrons and just a ton of history there. So look into that, Hollywood. Make something about that. Make Saving Private Ryan, but the black version of that. Make an epic World War II spectacle that's entirely African American and about African American characters who are cool, do cool shit, kill a bunch of Nazis. That's what I want to see. Alright, third movie idea, and I think this one is the most important. As I said at the beginning of this review, films are often used as a sort of propaganda, especially in the case of the Vietnam War. We've seen way too many movies from the perspective of direct participants in the Vietnam War. Even Full Metal Jacket and Apocalypse Now are guilty of this, of just showing the perspective of direct participants in the conflict. This would be an insanely interesting angle that I have never seen done anywhere. Make a movie set during the Vietnam War about draft dodgers of the Vietnam War. Because as I said at the beginning of this video, they were the actual heroes who actually got shit done and made a statement to society and changed the way that we currently think about our civil liberties and reform. Now, they don't explicitly have to be hippies. In fact, I suggest that you don't make this movie about hippies. Instead, make it about the oft-forgotten offshoot of leftism known as the New Left. People who weren't explicitly hippies, but were definitely on the left, and absolutely 100% opposed to the Vietnam War. Well-educated people who understand basic history and have read the Communist Manifesto and understand the flaws of American imperialism and know damn well that the Vietnam War is just a proxy war that won't mean shit no matter who wins. I'm talking a movie with an all-star cast of cool young people. Now, none of it happens in Vietnam. Much like how the best parts of Full Metal Jacket are completely in the United States, have a movie set just like on a college campus, have all these cool young characters who the audience really relates to and follows along with, have one of them get the draft card in the mail, and then he invites all his pals over to his room at like 9 p.m. and he's like, here's what I think of this shit, pulls out his lighter, flicks the wick, and just goes to town on that sucker. That's the kind of movie that I think Hollywood could definitely benefit from because it depicts a different perspective. You also get a lot more interesting shots than something filmed in Vietnam. And it's cheaper, too. You can just film in America, have all these cool people wearing period-accurate clothes, have period-accurate references. It doesn't even need to be like a war drama. Have it be a comedy. Make it goofy and fun, and have it be about all these draft dodgers just getting into all these wacky hijinks. One of their parents is like this old fat bald bastard, and he's like, "You're going to Vietnam, Timmy." And Timmy's like, "No thanks, Dad. Go eat your gravy." And that'd be a fun line. I don't know, you can toss that in there. I don't know. It'd be a fun line. Now, I don't know if Hollywood is exactly as willing to make accurate period pieces as they were during the Age of Apocalypse Now or the like. It does seem to be kind of a bygone thing in Hollywood, you know, actually making period pieces that are interesting, about interesting subjects. The last period piece I can think of that was actually kind of interesting was Black Klansman, because all the clothes were accurate and the sets were accurate. But when you make a movie set in a past period of time, you really have to pay attention to like chronology and the clothes and setting and everything, and making sure it looks like when it's set. But I honestly have faith in Hollywood. I think if they applied themselves, if they really tried, they could make a killer movie. Call it the Draft Dodgers or the Conscientious Objectors or the Cool Set or the Fuck Offers or something like that. You know, something very cool, rebellious, really carrying that young teenage American dream spirit. I think we could all use a movie like that right about now. Just about like people who don't want to go to the Vietnam War and they just do whatever they can to stay the fuck out of it. One of the guys is like this cool guy with like a cool haircut, you know, it's all slicked down, and he wears like a cool shirt with like a stripe across the front, and he has like really colorful pants, you know, and he's out there like, Vietnam can suck it, I don't care about going to Vietnam, I'm just a grocery store clerk. Man, that would be a really cool movie. So someone should make a movie about that, a nice refreshing change of pace. You could even have a scene where, like, you know, the Draft Dodgers are standing around and this big troop of, you know, Vietnam War soldiers comes bustling past and they're like, hey, get out of our way, we gotta go over to Nam. And then one of the Draft Dodgers, who's like a snarky wisecracker, maybe the comic relief of the group, is like, you're gonna fucking die over there. And then they all have a good giggle over that. I think that's the kind of movie that would really sell huge and would be very subversive to the typical portrait of Vietnam in cinema. Just an idea, but I really have faith in that one succeeding, especially with Vietnamese people. And Americans, because as I said, tons of Americans didn't like the Vietnam War when it happened. So give Draft Dodgers a movie that they can relate to. There's been way too many movies dedicated to the veterans. It's high time the, you know, countercultural badasses actually got a movie dedicated to them, about how cool they were and how much value they had to society. But like I said, don't make them hippies, because that's already been done. Just make them part of the new left, and that's good enough. So there you go, Hollywood. 3 free movie ideas, just tossing them out there. I got ideas, because I've seen a lot of this shit, and it's very predictable at this point. Pretty much got it down to a science, so yeah. Anyway, that's about all I have to say about the Vietnam War in cinema. I've made my own subversive Vietnam War comic. It's called Veterans Day, Revenge is Sweet, and I highly suggest checking it out. You can buy it by writing to Nicolas Sequeira, 1424 Columbine St, number 1, Denver, Colorado, 80206. It's the least I can do to write an excellent comic about the Vietnam War. Veterans Day really is a masterpiece that has stood the test of time. Highly recommend it. Anywho, hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you enjoyed my perspectives on the Vietnam War. I know some of you are going to accuse me of being a filthy communist down in the comments section. Don't worry, I'm not even a socialist. I'm just a liberal. But you don't need to be a communist to admit that the Vietnam War was morally objectionable in every conceivable way. And anyone who defends America's actions in Vietnam in the 1960s is messed up in the head. I said it. Alright? Great. That's going to do it for this video. Sayonara, suckers.